land the earliest kind of traded item?
Well, I doubt it. I think it was more likely to be something like obsidian, which is a volcanic, glassy thing, good for making knives and slicing things up. If you're going to swap, say, meat for obsidian, we swap, you walk off with the obsidian, I walk off with the meat, fine, no problem. If you actually want to sell me land, how is it that you're going to say that you own this land? How are you going to you can't walk off with it. So if you've got an army, then you can defend the land, but then if you had an army, you wouldn't need to buy and sell it.
So what you're saying is you need essentially a legal infrastructure to protect your rights to the land before you can start trading in it?
Absolutely. It becomes really, really complicated. The obsidian's an awful lot simpler.
OK. Well, we'll try and fit in an episode on obsidian towards the end of the series. Now, for most people, an investment in land starts with buying their own home. And in this, they're not short of advice. Most of daytime television, for a start, is devoted to the ups and downs of buying your own home. Probably most famously, Channel 4's location, 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 a mantra widely used to determine a good investment, and hence why the programme was such a hit, while BBC 4 show Chimneys, Chimneys, Chimneys was sadly axed after just one series. Which brings us on to the other great TV show on the subject, Property Ladder, wherein Sarah Beeny spent an hour trying to advise odious would-be property developers how to make money, and we spent an hour hoping to God they lost everything and ended up on the streets. The trouble, of course, was that Sarah Beeny's sage advice was in fact largely academic. During those boom years, you could have bought a house, boarded up the windows and spent the next 3 years in the pub and still reaped massive profits. You could scrawl, "I will kill again," on the lounge wall in red paint and still be beating them off with the proverbially fouled stick. Making money from property has always been more about cheap credit and upward trajectories than magnolia paint. It doesn't matter if you install a cheap power shower, a solid marble wet room, or a bucket on a tripod with some holes punched into the bottom with a nail. The market, like an unlicensed minicab driver, takes you whichever way it wants, regardless of what you do. And doesn't this just sum up our lack of engagement with the market? We trundle around IKEA on the lookout for the perfect patterned cushion while ignoring the macroeconomic trends that are really in charge. Property Ladder also promulgated another myth, namely that of the ladder itself, and the idea that getting your foot on the first rung is what owning property is all about. Because when you first hear about it, you imagine this so-called property ladder to be a nice, sturdy, stable ladder, the kind you might find propped up against a venerable old garden wall. In fact, once you're on this property ladder, you realise that it's often much more like one of those rope ladders that dangle out of a Sea King rescue helicopter in gale force winds. And that even if you do manage to grab hold of it, the only way to move up is to keep leaping from this ladder onto other ladders dangling from other helicopters and all piloted by gibbons. Don't lose heart. Land has always been a good investment in the long run. As Mark Twain said, or possibly somebody else off the internet, land is the thing to buy because folks will always want it and they ain't making it anymore. Twain's observation remains broadly true, and besides, for every new island created in Canary Wharf, another hotel slides off a cliff top in Scarborough, so it evens out in the end. The British have always instinctively understood the appeal of land, specifically of having a little place to call your own. In contrast, the French famously don't own their own homes, but instead rent apartments, mainly so that they can have affairs without subsequently losing them in the divorce. The difference between buying and renting, as any sexually exhausted Frenchman will tell you while lying supine on an adulterously tousled bed, is a philosophical distinction as much as anything. Renting recognises the human need to move on from time to time, to be free of ties, and indeed to lie on one's back at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, smoking gitane, ignoring the wet patch and staring at a ceiling fan. Ownership, meanwhile, recognises the human need to be trapped, to lie on one's back at 2 in the morning, unable to ignore the wet patch in the ceiling as you calculate the cost of getting a new roof and hence how many years away your planned long weekend in Bruges is now. This is known as security. So those are your options. But even the French, who don't want to own their own home, still feel this primeval attachment to it, which is why they cling to the notion that they're any good at farming, unaware that it's only the protectionist legislation of the common agricultural policy that allows them to compete with countries served by better weather and harder working people.